never personally met filmmaker David Lynch, but I once drove 5 hours to hear him give a 1-hour talk in a small town in Iowa. Today I'll give you 10 insights I learned from Lynch's life and his films that I hope will help you in your own creative journey. The last one may even save your life. I felt oddly connected to David Lynch, at least closer than 6 degrees of separation. Back in the 80s, I studied acting with Tracy Roberts, whose most famous student was Oscar winner Laura Dern, who would go on to act in 3 David Lynch movies. My acting career? Well, I didn't win any Oscars. I peaked doing a Domino's pizza commercial. Thanks for asking. And once I met Richard Farnsworth in a movie theater in Burbank, California, years before he'd receive an Oscar nomination in David Lynch's movie about the John Deere lawnmower-riding Alvin Strait. We both did some work for Steven Spielberg. When I was 21 and going to film school, I lived in a studio apartment at 1200 Riverside Drive in Burbank, California. One of my favorite places to eat was Bob's Big Boy at 4100 Riverside Drive. At one point in his life, Lynch said that he went to Bob's Big Boy every day at 2:30 to have a milkshake and write ideas on napkins. He did that for 7 years. The Thursday after Lynch died in January 2025, the LA Magazine reported that hundreds of fans left something behind as a huge shrine to the visionary behind Blue Velvet and Mulholland Drive. It took shape at the feet of the Big Boy statue on Riverside Drive. That by itself was very Lynchian. By that I mean something a little odd, offbeat, something between a dream and reality. Time magazine called Lynch the Czar of Bizarre. Other people said he was the Wizard of Weird. And since Lynch is considered one of the true originals of cinema, I thought it was worth making the trip back in 2008 to see the wizard speak himself. The 2.5-hour drive from Fairfield, Iowa, and the 2.5-hour drive back to Cedar Falls, where I was living at the time, was in itself kind of Lynchian. Because of my career in production, I've been fortunate to travel to all 50 states in the U.S. and to over 12 countries. I've had my share of fascinating experiences, worked with some amazingly talented people, captured some compelling images, and visited a few quirky spots. But Fairfield, Iowa, population just under 10,000 people, is one of the most unusual places I've ever visited. Kyle Munson wrote in the Des Moines Register that Fairfield might qualify as the Twin Peaks of Iowa with its sheer randomness of personalities. You never know whether you might run into a surfer or a nuclear physicist on the street. Because of its high number of tech startups, Fairfield has also been called Silicorn Valley. What attracts the eclectic and international crowd to this rural community is a TM college and training center. And that explains why Lynch was speaking there. And since his talk, Exploring the Frontiers of Creativity, was open to the public, I thought I'd make the trek there because, as Jimmy Buffett sang, you do it for the stories you can tell. Lynch did more of a Q&A than a talk, and when one questionnaire asked Lynch for a film idea prompt in the spirit of the experimental film, The Five Obstructions, Lynch said, "A bowling ball in space filled with red ants." That's classic David Lynch. Lynch did not do DVD commentaries and refused to expound on the meaning of his films. He once said, "Life is very, very complicated, and so film should allow to be too." He refused to explain the meaning of his films, preferring that people just experience them. But he did do a fair amount of interviews, and there's a well-done 2016 feature documentary, David Lynch, The Art Life. Even if you've never seen a David Lynch movie or TV show, there are takeaways about the creative process that you can learn from him. Number 1, a strangely normal childhood. Lynch was born in Montana and spent his early childhood in Idaho and Washington State. He said there were blue skies, picket fences, mowed lawns, and lots of freedom. He had loving and supportive parents. Nothing that would indicate the kind of films he would be known for. Number 2, a life-changing book. When his dad got promoted to a job in Washington, D.C., the family moved to Alexandria, Virginia, and it was there where he met a friend's father who was an artist with a studio. He hated high school, but loved the Robert Henry book, The Art Spirit. That book set a course for his life, and he started painting as an artist while still a teenager. Number 3, the last place he wanted to go. After high school, he attended art school in Boston one year, but found it too restrictive. He eventually landed at an art school in a city that he said was one of the last places he ever wanted to go, Philadelphia. Now, before you send any hate mail, Eagles fans, know that there's a happy ending here. Just stick with me. He said at the time that he lived there, back in the 1960s, quote, I had my first thrilling thought in Philadelphia. Philadelphia, more than any filmmaker, influenced me. It's the sickest, most corrupt, decaying, fear-ridden city imaginable. I was very poor and living in a bad area. I felt I was constantly in danger, but it was so fantastic and thrilling at the same time." Unquote. He said he lived next door to a morgue where he could watch them clean body bags. He even toured the inside of the morgue once. He had a neighbor who reeked of urine and another neighbor who crawled around in the backyard saying she was a chicken. It was as if his Norman Rockwell, Pacific Northwest, perfect childhood was being blended with a Salvador Dali-like surreal young adulthood. He said Philadelphia sparked in him a love of the smokestack industry, the factory neighborhoods, steel, fire, smoke, the sound of buildings, and the life of a factory worker. Those experiences would shape his future films. Number 4, start small and pivot. One of my favorite quotes is over 200 years old and from the German poet and playwright Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. Even if I didn't pronounce that 100% correctly, that's a real name. The translation of his quote that I like the best is, "In action there is power, grace, and magic. Just starting sets things in motion. Like the flywheel concept where it takes considerable strength to start the flywheel, but it eventually gains traction and spins by itself. In action, there is power, grace, and magic." Though Lynch started out wanting to be a painter, it was while he was a student at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts that he found the art spirit was alive and well and had a vision for a moving painting with sound called Six Men Getting Sick. This is back in 1967. This short film was only 1 minute long, but it was meant to play on a loop, so I guess you could say it was an indefinite feature film. But $200 was a lot of money for a student back in the 1960s, so he wrote off filmmaking as too expensive. But that short film got him a commission to make a film for a wealthy patron. He ended up making 3 or 4 films in Philadelphia, and that helped him eventually get a grant at this new film conservatory opening in Los Angeles, the American Film Institute. It was not the polished AFI machine that it is today, but Lynch said it was more chaotic, which he thought was great because, again, he could just have the freedom to create while living there for free. He lived in the stables of a 55-room mansion in Beverly Hills that contained the school at the time. He lived and created there for 4 years. It was at AFI when he began working on what became his first feature film, Eraserhead. When he was on a BAFTA interview, he said of Eraserhead that it was his most spiritual film. When the interviewer asked if he wanted to expound on that, he said, "No." It's interesting to point out that also at AFI at that same time were Paul Schrader and Terrence Malick, also filmmakers known for their touch of spirituality in filmmaking. Schrader even wrote a book titled Transcendental Style in Film. In Lynch's masterclass on the section on cinematography, he said that he visually loves seeing characters emerge out of darkness to reveal themselves, then added, "People coming out of darkness is visually beautiful, but the idea of coming out of darkness is really what life is all about." Number 5, a 5-year struggle. After finishing at AFI, Lynch wanted to turn his student film into a feature film, but he kept running out of money. Needing a place to live, he heard about a bungalow in Beverly Hills available for just $80 a month. He couldn't afford that, so he took a job delivering the Wall Street Journal at night. He only made $40.02 a week, but that, and occasionally helping fix plumbing problems at his landlord's rentals, covered his bills and left him time to work on his film at other hours of the day and night. It would take him 5 years to complete Eraserhead. It came out in 1977, when midnight showings were popular. For a frame of reference, the Rocky Horror Picture Show had its first midnight showing in 1976, kicking off its phenomenal and long-lasting audience participation tradition. I went to a midnight showing of the Rocky Horror Picture Show in Coconut Grove my second year of college, and it was, to this day, unlike anything I've ever experienced in a movie theater. That same year, I saw a 16mm print of Eraserhead in film school. Shout out to film professor George Capewell, who geeked out over Eraserhead and began my film appreciation on a level beyond entertainment. Eraserhead didn't resonate with me, but it resonated with enough people that its midnight shows ran for years, and it got him on the radar of one unlikely person in Hollywood. Number 6, unlikely connections. Remember that patron back in Philadelphia who helped keep Lynch's filmmaking aspirations alive? Well, that happened again in Hollywood. Mel Brooks loved Eraserhead. After a screening, he gave Lynch a hug and called him a madman, then helped Lynch's next film get made. But since Brooks was known for the ruckus broad comedies Blazing Saddles, Silent Movie, and Young Frankenstein, he kept his name out of the credits, not to mislead audiences. That film was The Elephant Man. When I was 19 years old, I'd been fed a steady diet of mainstream pop culture films and TV shows. No judgment. Even Alfred Hitchcock loved Smokey and the Bandit and watched it repeatedly. This was years before the ubiquitous flood of content on the internet and VHS tapes. I coined the terms screenwriting with brass knuckles and filmmaking with brass knuckles as a metaphor for movies that pack a punch. David Lynch's The Elephant Man was one of the first films that hit me at a gut level. I can't fully explain my experience of seeing The Elephant Man for the first time, but I was in peak physical condition. A sports-obsessed, rock concert-attending kid that walked into a movie theater one night with a date and watched a slow-moving black and white film set in Victorian London about a severely disfigured and mistreated person who moves from darkness to light, and it moved me. And I think that experience and seeing Apocalypse Now in theaters the year before opened my eyes to the power of cinema. If you're 19 years old today and try to watch The Elephant Man for the first time on your iPhone with all the distractions in your life, you may not have the same experience. Heck, not even film critic Roger Ebert was a fan of the movie when it first came out, giving it just 2 of 4 stars. But if you want to be a filmmaker, it's a great film to study. The cinematography of Freddie Francis, the acting of John Hurt, Anthony Hopkins, Anne Bancroft, and John Gielgud, Ann Coates' editing. She had a 60-year career and won an Oscar for editing Lawrence of Arabia. And the makeup by Christopher Tucker are all extraordinary. It was nominated for 8 Oscars, including Lynch's direction and the script that he co-wrote with Christopher DeVore and Eric Bergen. Bradley Cooper credits The Elephant Man movie for him wanting to become an actor. You'll learn more about filmmaking watching The Elephant Man 25 times rather than going down a checklist of 25 movies that you watch one time. Call it the Elephant Man Film School. And kudos to Michael Eisner, who before he went to Disney was the president of Paramount Pictures, and the one that gave the go-ahead for The Elephant Man to get produced. Number 7, Learning from Failures. My favorite book about Lynch and his creative process is Room to Dream, written by Christine McKenna and Lynch himself. Love the audiobook. Lynch talks about his many failures, including his decision to try and do the makeup for John Hurt as the Elephant Man. It was late in pre-production and there was no turning back. Lynch thought he was going to get fired from the biggest opportunity of his life. But the producer, Mel Brooks, stood behind him and hired British makeup artist Christopher Tucker to work his magic. Lynch's Dune was a critical and box office failure. One of his dream projects, Ronnie Rocket, never even got made. Lynch said there is freedom that comes from failure. In the case of The Elephant Man, he realized his limitations. Number 8. Embrace your limitations. And now we come to the John Deere section of this video. I think The Elephant Man is Lynch's masterpiece. I think the limitations, the constraints that were in place, helped make him a better filmmaker. But there's another movie of Lynch's that also had built-in restraints, and that is my second favorite David Lynch film, The Straight Story. I know. There are many other films and TV shows that are other people's favorite film and TV shows by Lynch. But again, they don't resonate with me. Of course, this is subjective territory. When Lynch was asked why he turned down the opportunity to direct Star Wars: Return of the Jedi, he simply said it wasn't his cup of tea. Much of Lynch's work was polarizing. When he won the Palme d'Or at Cannes one year, some in the audience booed. During one test screening, some people ran out of the theater, and another person shouted, "This guy is sick and should never be allowed to make another movie." New York Times critic Vincent Canby wrote of Twin Peaks, Fire Walk With Me, "It's not the worst film ever made. It just feels like it." The Straight Story may not be your cup of tea, but if you want to make independent films or just love indie films, The Straight Story is a great movie to watch and study. It's a simple story, one that embraces its limitations. David Foster Wallace wrote, "Most of Lynch's films don't really have much of a point. But what I enjoy about The Straight Story is it does have a point. It's a story of an old man estranged from his ailing brother. It's a story about forgiveness and reconciliation. That's a theme that never gets old. And not every film needs to be a big splashy Hollywood movie. Screenwriter Scott Frank has written a few big Hollywood movies, including Minority Report and Wolverine. During a Q&A years ago, Frank said this: "I think there are some stories that are less cinematic than others and might not be engaging in terms of film, but David Lynch made a movie about a guy riding a lawnmower across the country, and I loved it." Now, technically, Alvin Strait in real life didn't ride across the country, but it was about a 250-mile trek from Lorenz, Iowa to Mount Zion, Wisconsin, on an old riding lawnmower. Because of health reasons, he can't drive, but he wants to do it his own way. That's an active protagonist. Screenwriter Mary Sweeney saw the story of Alvin Strait in the New York Times, and after securing the rights to the story, spent almost 4 years of writing the script with John Roach, who she had known since they were kids going to Catholic school together in Madison, Wisconsin. When Lynch was asked what he liked about the script, he said it was like James Dean, except he's old. No studio is buying that pitch, even if you call it Rebel with the Riding Lawnmower. But Lynch made it with Sweeney as editor and one of the producers, and I think it's a quiet masterpiece. It belongs on the same shelf as the Danish film Babette's Feast, the Ozu classic Japanese film Tokyo Story, and the Oscar Best Foreign Film from Poland, Ida, and Tender Mercies, written by Texan Horton Foote and directed by Australian Bruce Beresford. Those films from global cinema are my cups of tea. I guess I like the less abstract Lynch. Remember Lynch's comment about a bowling ball in space filled with red ants? Can't get much more abstract than that. Number 9, learn by doing. Lynch was always doing something, from painting, making short films, feature films. He made furniture, he did photography, he directed commercials and music videos, he acted in some movies, had a recording studio, and even did some YouTube videos where he did the weather report for LA. He was always creating, always taking action, because in action, there is power, grace, and magic. Again, in Lynch's masterclass, he said, "I think we should all have as much technical knowledge as possible to make films. The technical knowledge of a camera, lenses, film stock, lighting, sound, editing machines. But I think the main thing is to learn by doing. When you have hands-on and are doing things, it brings you into the thing, and then you realize what this does and what that does. And it opens up the possibility for the flow of ideas. You're learning by doing, not an intellectual understanding, but an experiential thing." It reminds me of the David Mamet quote that you only learn bull riding by getting on the bull. And you don't need to be on the biggest, baddest bull. Remember small starts. Remember Lynch's first film was just a minute long. Now, if you want to be more ambitious, one of the ways that Lynch often talked about developing a feature film idea was getting a stack of 70 3x5 cards. I think I have one over here. A stack of 3x5 cards like this, index cards. And you write a scene or an idea on each card, and you're putting them together like a puzzle. And when you have 70 of them, you have the bones of a screenplay. Number 10, this will kill you. It's not hard to find a photograph or video clip of David Lynch smoking a cigarette. He started smoking as a teenager in the 1950s when smoking was very cool. But in the 50s and early 60s, reports of the dangers of smoking started to emerge. Novelist Stephen King says, "Nicotine is great for firing the synapses in your brain, but the problem is, it's killing you at the same time." In a social media post on August 5th, 2024, Lynch wrote that he enjoyed smoking very much, but that there was a price to pay for this enjoyment. Lynch died 5 months later in January 2025 at the age of 78 due to complications of emphysema. Again, if you're a young person today, that 19-year-old watching The Elephant Man for the first time, you've heard it before, but smoking cigarettes, well, you know. But let's end on a more positive note and talk about that one of Lynch's greatest assets was having a strong creative vision. He had a unique way of seeing and exploring the world and ideas, not knowing where they would take him. I put more time into producing this video, well over 100 hours, than I've done on any video so far on this channel. I have no idea how many people will watch this, but I hope it helps you take an action or two in your own creative endeavors, because in action, there is power, grace, and magic. Well, that wraps up my unofficial David Lynch mini film school. But if you stick around for extra credit, and you should, I share 10 films that inspired David Lynch and give some thoughts on film schools today. Now for some extra credit. One of the benefits of film school is being around knowledgeable professors and like-minded students to inspire and encourage you. But for whatever reason, not everyone has the opportunity to attend film school. You may live in a country that doesn't even have a film school. But here are a few exercises you can do anywhere in the world, basically for free. When Lynch was at AFI, he had the opportunity to study film analysis with Frank Daniel. Daniel would take a small class of maybe 10 students and give each of them an element to study as they watched a film. Could be the cinematography, the editing, the sound design, etc. And after they watched the film, they'd all sit around and talk about what they'd learned. You can do that with any movie. But here are 10 movies that Lynch mentioned in various interviews that influenced and inspired him. Sunset Boulevard, The Apartment, both by Billy Wilder, who came to Hollywood via Austria and Germany. Chinatown, The Wizard of Oz, It's a Wonderful Life, A Place in the Sun, Hitchcock's Rear Window, Mr. Hugh Lowe's Holiday by Frenchman Jacques Tati, La Strada, and 8½. Those last two, both by the Italian filmmaker Fellini. Film school today is a different beast when Lynch went to AFI in the 70s. He not only left there with no student debt, for a long time he didn't even have to pay for housing. Until he got paid for The Elephant Man, he said that he never made more than $200 a month. Some film schools today are in the $50,000 to $70,000 a year range, with living expenses on top of that. If you can get grants, scholarships, have a trust fund or wealthy parents, or retired at 21 because you sold an app for $100 million, that's great. Go to a top 10 film school. But student loans of $100,000 or $200,000 are not unheard of. And I even heard of one guy. This is the record number that I heard of a student loan from a film school grad. He had a 4-year degree and an MFA and $300,000 in student loans. That's insane. Maybe not if you're a brain surgeon, but if it's film school, that's crazy. Not to mention at a time of uncertainty in the film and TV business, one that's always been hard to break into. I'm pro-education, pro-college, even pro-film school. Under the right circumstances. I have an undergraduate degree in cinema and a master's in digital journalism. Be intentional. There are programs out there that are much more reasonable cost-wise, and ones that don't just sell the Hollywood dream. Ones that give you a well-rounded education and prepare you for a wide variety of production opportunities out there. When I went to film school, there wasn't YouTube and similar platforms where now it's estimated over 2 million people make a full-time living creating content. Pick a school that won't drown you in student loans and gives you a hands-on education wearing as many hats as you can. And if college isn't an option, just keep creating as many films and videos as you can as you develop your craft. Lastly, I want to thank Sunbelt Lawn and Tractor in Winter Park, Florida. I was looking for a John Deere hat to buy for this video, and they just gave me this hat. I didn't even tell them I was doing a video. Does that count as a brand deal? If so, that would be my first one, and I'll count it as a small victory. Again, thanks for the hat, Sunbelt Lawn and Tractor. Nothing runs like a deer.